And once again something nightmarish happened. One evening after we'd had tea, when grandfather and myself were sitting reading the Psalms, and grandmother was washing up, in rushed young Uncle Yakov, disheveled as always, and looking like a worn-out broom. Without saying good evening, he flung his cap into the corner and started talking very rapidly to the accompaniment of wild flourishes. Misha's gone berserk, father. He had dinner at my place, got drunk, and then went completely off his rocker. He smashed the cookery, tore up a woolen dress that was all ready for a customer, broke the window, swore at me and Gregory. He's on his way here, breathing hellfire and shouting, "I'll pull father's beard off. I'll kill him. You better look out." Grandfather, his hands resting on the table, slowly rose to his feet, and his face became one big frown round the nose, so it looked terrifyingly like a hatchet. "Do you hear that, mother?" he screeched, "coming to kill his own father, my own son. Well, it's time." He threw his shoulders back and started pacing up and down the room. Then he went to the door, shoved a heavy bolt into the lock, and turned to Yakov. "Do you still want to grab Varvara's dowry? Well, this is what you'll both get." He stuck his fingers under Uncle's nose, making him jump back from the insult. "Father, what would I want with it?" "You? I know you too well." Grandmother didn't say anything and hurriedly cleared away the tea things into the cupboard. "I came to protect you." "That's a good one," sneered Grandfather. "Thank you, son. Mother, give this cunning fox something to hold. A poker'll do, or an iron. And you, Yakov Vasiliev, as soon as your brother breaks the door down, give him one. On my head, of course." Uncle thrust his hands in his pockets and slunk off to a corner. "If you don't trust me—" "Trust?" shouted Grandfather, stamping on the floor. "I trust any wild beast, a dog, a hedgehog, but you, I know you got him drunk and put the whole idea in his head. Well, have a go with the poker. Anyone like him, me?" Grandmother softly whispered to me, "Run upstairs and keep an eye open for Uncle Mikhail. As soon as you see him coming down the street, come and tell us as quick as you can. Off with you now, hurry." And upstairs I went, rather frightened at the thought that my drunken uncle was soon to arrive, but proud all the same at being entrusted with such a task. I craned my neck out of the window and looked down the street. It was wide and covered with a thick layer of dust, out of which large cobblestones poked like great swellings. It stretched away to the left, crossed a gully, and came out into the Ostrozhnia Square, where the gray buildings of the old prison, with its 4 towers, stood steadily on the clay soil. For me, this imposing building had a certain melancholy beauty. To the right, 3 houses away from ours, was the broad expanse of Senya Square, surrounded on all sides by the yellow block of the convict barracks and the lead-colored fire tower. At the top of the wide-eyed tower walked a watchman like a dog on a chain. The whole square was cut up by gullies, and at the bottom of one stood a greenish slime. Over to the right was the stagnant Dyukov pond, into which, according to the tale grandmother told, the uncles had thrown my father one winter night through a hole in the ice, almost exactly opposite my window. Through a hole in the ice. Almost exactly opposite my window was an alley lined with little brightly painted houses. It finished up by the fat, squat church of the 3 Saints. If you looked straight in front of you, you could see roofs, just like overturned boats, floating in the green waves of the gardens. Worn by the storms of long winters, and washed by the interminable autumn rain, the faded houses in our street were all covered with dust. They huddled close to each other like beggars at the church door. And, like me, they seemed to be waiting for somebody, their eyes protruding suspiciously. There were few people about, and they walked slowly, just like pensive cockroaches in front of the fire. The stifling heat rose up to where I was sitting, and the nasty smell of onion and carrot pies, which made me terribly depressed, was heavy in the air. I felt weary in some special way that I found almost unbearable. My breast seemed to be filled with hot liquid lead, and it crushed me from within, and threatened to burst. I felt as if I was swelling up like a blister, and the little room with its coffin-like ceiling made me feel cramped, hemmed in. And here he was, Uncle Mikhail. He was looking round the corner of an alley outside a gray house. His cap was pulled down over his head, so his ears stuck out. He was wearing a rust-colored waistcoat, dusty boots that reached to his knee, and held one hand in a pocket of his check trousers, clutching his beard with the other. I couldn't see his face from where I was, but from the way he was standing, he seemed to be about to leap across the street and beat against Grandfather's door with his black, hairy hands. I should have run downstairs to tell everybody he'd arrived, but I could not tear myself away from the window at the sight of Uncle crossing the street, cautiously, as if he was frightened of getting dust on his gray boots. Now I could hear the door creak as he opened it, and the tinkling of glass. I dashed downstairs and banged on Grandfather's door. "Who's that?" he asked gruffly without opening up. "You? Well, been to the pub?" "Right, back upstairs." "I'm frightened up there. You'll have to lump it a bit longer." Once more I went back to my window. It was getting dark. The dust in the street was piled deeper and blacker. Oily yellow blotches of light appeared in the windows of the houses. From the house opposite came the sound of music, guitar strings singing sadly and sweetly, and there was singing in the pub as well. When the door opened, I could hear the tired, broken voice of Nikitishkin, an old bearded beggar with a burning coal instead of a right eye, and whose left eye was always shut tight. His voice was cut off like an axe when the door slammed shut again. Grandmother, envious of him, and whenever he sang, she would say with a sigh, "What luck, knowing all those beautiful songs." Sometimes she would call him into our yard. He would sit on the steps, leaning on a stick, and singing and telling stories, while Grandmother would sit next to him, listening and asking, "What's that? The Holy Virgin was in Ryazan?" And the beggar would reply convincingly in a deep voice, "She was everywhere, in all provinces." Imperceptibly, a wave of heavy drowsiness seemed to flow down the street and weigh down on my heart and my eyes. How wonderful if Grandmother would come, or even Grandfather. What kind of person must my father have been for my uncles and grandfather to have hated him, and for Grandmother, Grigory, and Aunt Yevgenia to say such good things about him? And where was my mother? I had been thinking more and more about Mother, and made her the chief character of all the fairy tales and legends Grandmother used to tell me. The fact that Mother didn't wish to live in her own family made her loom larger and larger in my dreams. I imagined she lived at a highway inn with a band of robbers who stole from rich travelers and shared what they got with the poor. Perhaps she lived in a forest, in a cave, with good thieves, of course, and cooked for them, and guarded the gold they'd stolen. Or perhaps she was wandering over the earth, counting her treasures, like the robber princess Yangalchevya, together with the Holy Virgin, who no doubt was continually exhorting her, as she exhorted the robber princess. In verse. It is not for you, greedy slave, to gather all the earth's gold and silver. It is not for you, hungry soul, to conceal your bareness with the earth's goodness. And Mother would reply in the words of the robber princess, "Most Holy Virgin, pardon me. Have pity on my sinful soul. I did not plunder for my own sake, but for my one and only son." And the Virgin, who was kind like Grandmother, pardoned her and said, "O Varayushka of Tartar blood, O you evil unbeliever, now go your own way and tread your own path of tears. Do not touch the Russian people, but spy out the forest Mordvinian, or chase a Kalmuk over the steeps." I was carried away into the world of dreams when I recalled these fairy tales, only to be woken up by the uproar and shouting downstairs in the entrance passage. As I leaned out of the window, I could see Grandfather, Uncle Yakov, the pub landlord, and the comical Sheremes Millian, pushing Uncle Mikhail through the gate out into the street. He put up some resistance, but they kept beating him on his arms, his back and neck, and kicked him and sent him sprawling in the dust of the street. The gate banged shut, and the latch and bolt clattered as they were slammed shut. A crumpled cap was thrown over the gates. Everything became quiet. After lying still for a few moments, my uncle got up. His clothes were all torn and disheveled, and he picked up a stone and hurled it at the door. A hollow sound rang out, just like the bottom of an empty barrel. Some miserable-looking people crawled out of the pub, shouting and bellowing and waving their arms. Heads were poked out of windows, and the street became alive with laughing and shouting. All of this seemed like a fairy tale, fascinating and exciting, but at the same time unpleasant and terrifying. And suddenly everything vanished from my memory, as I am writing now, leaving silence and emptiness.